Зліт!
Нижче. Правее.
Russian troops took up a favorable observation point and began searching for targets to strike. At that time, a small group of Ukrainians was carrying out an evacuation nearby. They were trying to quickly retrieve equipment to relocate to a safer position, but this time they couldn't go unnoticed. A group of Russian mortar operators spotted the Ukrainian crew and immediately began shelling their position. The shell didn't hit the vehicle, but it managed to ignite the ammunition stockpile that the Ukrainian soldiers had come for. The Russians managed to wound one of the Ukrainian soldiers, but it's hard to call that a success. So they quickly reload the next mortar rounds and try to finish off the target. But the Ukrainians aren't just sitting idle. The part of the team that remained in the dugout quickly uses a drone to locate the Russian positions, aiming to launch a counterattack while the enemy's attention is focused elsewhere. And on the way to the mortar team, the reconnaissance unit spots another very attractive target. The Russians assumed they were at a safe distance from the front line and set up a small storage site for mortar shells to supply their comrades. The mortar crew was confident they were safe, so they continued to fire actively, unaware that very soon they might no longer have the means to do so. Meanwhile, Ukrainian drone operators were already preparing their response. While Ukrainians prepared and launched their FPV drones, the Russians unknowingly gathered all their ammo in one spot, unaware they were being closely watched and calmly targeted by the approaching drone. If it weren't for the reconnaissance team, the FPV pilot would have never spotted this field ammunition depot. But thanks to accurate guidance, the drone operator now has a good chance to destroy not only the mortar shells, but also the stash of anti-tank mines that the Russians generously placed here.
Летай. Летай. Нижче. Нижче. Правее.
Friends, make sure to give this video a big thumbs up for the outstanding work of the Ukrainian soldiers. As the camera pulls back, we can see that the vehicle the Russians used to deliver the ammunition was also destroyed by the blast wave. A truly remarkable strike. The crew of this armored vehicle realized halfway through that things might end badly, and even tried to turn back and retreat. But this time, it only made things worse. The drone struck directly at a vulnerable spot. Russians are increasingly avoiding advancing in large columns, opting instead to split into smaller groups. And although equipment is often destroyed while still approaching, sometimes this tactic does manage to bring results. This Russian armored vehicle managed to get very close to Ukrainian positions and began laying down suppressive fire. The trees obstruct the line of sight, and the Russians can't see the enemy, so they fire blindly, hoping to hit someone. The Ukrainian soldiers who didn't have time to retreat to other fortifications seem to understand this and try to quietly leave their position to avoid getting trapped.
Тихо. Братан, рухайся. Ще? Стріше, уходьте, уходьте, уходьте.
The crew of the Russian armored vehicle decides to change position,
Давайте, рух.
believing there's nothing more for them to do here. Meanwhile, the Ukrainian soldiers safely leave the area
Все, пішли, Влас. Давай, пішли, майор.
and report to their commander that enemy armored vehicles have been spotted in their sector.
Быстрей, быстрей, быстрей.
The reconnaissance drone has locked onto the target and is closely monitoring the movement of the Russian vehicle. Not far from the road, the Russians spot a partially destroyed hangar and decide it's the best place for a temporary hideout. That would have been a good shelter, one that could have really saved the Russians, but this time they weren't lucky. The nearby Ukrainian brigade, which specializes in such complex operations, had an optical fiber drone ready. From the high-quality video feed, it's immediately clear that this is not an ordinary FPV drone. And since the hangar walls no longer obstruct the signal, the operator has the time and opportunity to aim very carefully before delivering the strike. The pilot moves slowly to avoid breaking the cable connecting him to the kamikaze drone. He flies around the armored vehicle from the side and notices that the Russians left a hatch open. There's no better target spot, and the pilot easily flies inside.
Отлично, есть.
Additional reconnaissance reports that the vehicle has been destroyed and no second sortie is needed. But a few minutes later, they spot another armored vehicle moving through the village. The village is almost completely destroyed, and now there's a chance to stop the vehicle before the Russians manage to find cover. Ukrainian drone pilots prepare the next wave, this time using regular FPVs, and get ready to hunt. With a bit of luck, they'll be able to stop the Russians before they leave the village. Knowing the direction of the Russian APC's movement, the drone operator turns around and flies directly toward the armored vehicle. The first strike was enough to hit and stop it, but the job isn't finished just yet. Most likely, the crew has already managed to abandon the vehicle, but that doesn't mean they won't try to return later to repair or evacuate it. The armored vehicle appears to be mostly intact, so the next drone must deal as much damage as possible. And now the pilot has an advantage. The target is stationary, which means there's an opportunity for a precise strike, and he succeeds. The first explosion ignites the vehicle.
Талбот, що случилось? Що случилось?
Хтось закурив не там, де треба.
And after a few minutes, the fire reaches the ammunition supply. The Russian army has an advantage in multiple rocket launcher systems and uses them to severely disrupt the lives of Ukrainians, targeting both civilian cities and military objectives. Their numbers have significantly decreased over the 4 years of full-scale war, and whenever Ukrainians manage to destroy such rare equipment, it is considered a major success.
Гамлет, это монах. Ведется обстрел.
The Russians also try to preserve these rocket systems, so every time Ukrainian intelligence manages to detect their activity, all possible efforts are immediately focused on destroying the target. The first detected launcher had already fired and was preparing to leave its position.
Arctic, status.
The Ukrainian FPV pilot managed to catch it almost halfway through its retreat. These MLRS units are highly vulnerable and have almost no protection against a direct hit. That's why just one drone was enough this time to create a fireworks display.
You are a legend, brother. Great job.
During such operations, mobile FPV teams must act extremely quickly. Once reconnaissance confirms a target, there's virtually no time to think. Teams need to reach the launch position and get their drones airborne before the Russians escape beyond effective range. According to statistics, Ukrainian FPV pilots manage to destroy only a few dozen MLRS units per month. Both sides fully understand just how rare and valuable this kind of equipment is, and it's even rarer to destroy such a target with a full load of 40 rockets, just like in this case. But that wasn't the end. Not far from this position, another MLRS was spotted, one that had just arrived and was preparing to take aim. But this time, it was the target. The Russians didn't manage to fire a single rocket, and all it took was a small spark from the Ukrainian drone pilot to ignite an explosive and spectacular result. War never changes. Hunt or be hunted. And with every destroyed MLRS, it becomes increasingly difficult for the Russian army to recover. The involvement of North Korean troops in the Russia-Ukraine conflict has been confirmed by numerous videos. Intelligence sources have repeatedly stated that, in addition to sending soldiers, North Korea has also supplied Russia with military equipment. However, sightings of this equipment on the battlefield have been extremely rare. But this time, Ukrainian FPV drone pilots managed to take down a truly rare beast. A North Korean M1991 multiple launch rocket system. The Russians didn't even make much of an effort to hide, they simply drove behind the nearest ruined building. The drone operator carefully and slowly approached the MLRS from behind and delivered a strike directly on the ammunition stockpile. The strike triggered the launch of one of the rockets, which shot through the vehicle's front window. Despite this, the soldiers inside the cabin somehow miraculously survived, and within seconds, they even managed to escape through the window. But the next drone completely destroyed the system, leaving no chance of rescue. But this Russian crew was a bit more fortunate. They managed to take up a position and began firing. The Ukrainians attempted to strike it with a cluster munition. The wide area of impact was supposed to compensate for any inaccuracy and eliminate the enemy. But this time they missed, and the Russians immediately rushed to retreat. It was a very risky move by the Russians to position themselves so close to Ukrainian fortifications. That's exactly why they were almost hit by artillery fire. Now, the road to a safe place to hide and rest will be a long one. Meanwhile, Ukrainian drone pilots already have them in their sights, and the only way to survive is to get out of range of any unmanned systems as quickly as possible. And although the Russians weren't eliminated, their MLRS was still damaged by shrapnel. Just a few kilometers from the front line, they decided it was safe enough to begin an evacuation operation for the damaged vehicle. They probably felt very relieved to have survived and became too relaxed, not realizing that the distance to the Ukrainian positions was still quite close and the danger is much closer than they think.
If we can pull the radio frequency, either pass it with the wounded or figure out some way.
Взлет!
The damaged MLRS is fleeing at maximum speed. Just a few more minutes, and the Russians would have truly managed to leave the strike zone. But luck did not smile on them a second time. The first strike successfully took out the tractor unit, causing the MLRS to flip onto its side, but it still didn't catch fire. Well, it looks like they'll have to use another FPV drone to finally finish off this lucky piece of equipment.